thoughtful ideas, suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and all the countries, and listen.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To those joining us perhaps for the first time for Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for suggestions for guest topics and subjects in upcoming segments. As always, we want to present to you a show that gives you thoughtful ideas and insights so that you can step away afterwards and reflect and try to understand kind of where the reality of the society that we live in is moving forward. And we've divided this show into part one and part two. So this is part two, which you'll catch part one before this one. And my guest this week is Dr. Christoper Jones, from Durham University in the UK, Ph.D. recently, but has done great research in the area of, I'll just change it to the area of humanism and humanity, which also obviously includes a lot of race and racism and other issues related to that. But it also tries to get at our common humanity and our rehumanization of each other. And it is important to a society, to democracy like ours, that is going through such a divide and such a change. And we're so splintered, we're so divided, not only in the blue and red reality of the political scenes, but also in the way we think about each other, the way we treat each other, the struggle for power and the retaining of power, the struggle about what does shared power mean going forward. What does it mean to live in a majority-minority society? What does it mean now to be having to have dialogue with people that you never wanted to talk to or thought you would ever have to talk to? Not only as equals, forget the word equal, as just another human being just like you, because that's really what it boils down to. And so that humanity piece becomes very important as we go forward as a society, or we're not going to have a society. Democracy is a shaky thing. You know, that famous quote is, it's a republic if we can hold on to it. It's a democratic society if we can hold on to it. And I think right now we're being tested as to whether or not we can hold on to it. So we're going to apply some of the things that Dr. Jones has been talking about in the first part to the larger context of society's ongoing challenges with each other, quite frankly, and how some of the wonderful work and research he's done applies to our reality, as whether you're a citizen, whether you're a constituent, whether you're a congregant, whether you're a consumer, whatever you want to use, all these things apply to us. So welcome again, Dr. Jones, and here we go.
Hi again. Should I introduce myself again, or do I
just a little brief?
Okay,
Yeah.
just a brief thing. I'm Christoper, aka Dr. X. I am a growing Pan-African scholar activist. I'm also a fellow and program manager and tutor for the Institute for Educational and Social Equity. So I teach and I do research around race, racism, racial inclusion, but race intersected with other forms of characteristics. I take a critical race theory perspective, intersectionality perspective, and a lot of my work is championing equity, diversity, inclusion, and love. And now that I'm done with my PhD a year ago, I'm trying to put my work out there and trying to get out there. So
all right. So let's dive into this equity, diversity, inclusion, and love piece.
Yes.
Because this EDI stuff in the corporate world is eating people's lunch. A lot of folks said, well, we made no progress. We've made no change. A lot of lip service, a lot of good talks and speeches about what should happen or be happening, but nothing's changed. So where do you see the future of ED&I? Without actually, your point is so well taken. Without the love piece, ED and I don't,
It's
don't stand much
impossible.
of a chance.
It's like what we said kind of previously about empathy and trust, right?
Right, right.
It's the topic of love is very I use bell hooks, but the topic of love is very is challenging for us as a society because you can't have inclusivity if you do not love yourself.
Right.
And I think a lot of the times there's a lot of activists out there, I guess, saying different things around how people don't love themselves. I think there's a more inclusive way of approaching that, right? So, how do we love ourselves, right? How do we love ourselves? Because if we do love ourselves, we're able to love others. We're able to be empathetic, and are able to accept. I think acceptance is very important as well, right?
Yep.
How do we become our authentic self? Because authenticity is around the definition is authenticity is not fixed, but it's mainly a process where we're allowed to be our true selves, be humans, be able to come to whole. So I think when it comes to, I say EDIL, I think right now the challenge is, I think so much happened during lockdown, people having to confront their reality, specifically the racial reality because of BLM and other protests. I think people are kind of maybe tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you see what's happening in different states as far as the curriculum being taking out Martin Luther King, the KKK,
Oh yeah.
and a lot of that is our history, right? And a lot of that is something we need to confront. But again, it's difficult when, like we talked about previously, about people have to sit with that discomfort, and that
Right.
is what's very challenging, I'd say.
And that whole idea about loving yourself
Hmm.
has become a whole market, a whole enterprise, a whole,
Hmm.
and some of the stuff that's out there of self-help, self-therapy, it's about as useless as a $4 bill. Um, so this movement to love self first before one can then therefore love the other may be different from themselves. How do we really get at that question of loving self, and what does that really mean and entail?
Well, specifically in my research, I use the power threat meaning framework. So the power threat meaning framework is about understanding the operations of power in our
Right,
life. And just in some, it's about asking certain questions about how we've developed certain biases. Like, how do we question our own prejudices? How do we write our own stories? And I think that's a lot of how we can love ourselves. It's about, so for me in particular, I used to be homophobic, but I had to understand where that came from,
right.
right? As an athlete, as a Black athlete, I played at an extremely high level where homophobic discourse was normalized. A lot of my religious background, and we know within the Black community, there's a lot of, I guess, uh, religious-based homophobia, I'd say.
Yep,
Just to be clear, but I had to understand where that was coming from, right? But part of that was the reasoning behind, uh, like I would say, LGBTQI activism. Does that make sense? So it's about what how am I reacting to it? We have to understand our reactions to something, where our reactions come from. And
right.
once I understood that and understood that I had to sit with that and educate myself. Again, we talked about before about how we're educating other people, but people need to listen and hear, but then also go and do the work themselves and not have people do it for them. So a lot of it is around, like I said, self-care and about understanding your own story and then writing your own story. Because when we realize that we talked before about policies, and a lot of policies influence how we move. So for example, I have locks, right? I used to call them dreadlocks. But what does dread mean? Dread is a British term for me. Like, dread is like I dread something. It's a negative
Right,
connotation to it,
right,
right?
right.
And I saw on the news yesterday, there's still policies where there's a student who got in-school suspension because they have locks, right? So, but when we continue to call them dreadlocks, we again, that impacts how we view
That's a
something,
negative.
right?
Yeah, negative.
So I tell people in African traditions, they were called sacred locks. So again, it's about understanding thyself, understanding cultures, understanding how certain things impact us. So if someone walks around with locks, people are threatened by that, right? So it's about understanding your own story and about how you can write your own story. And it's not about, and the Power That Meaning framework talks about not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you.
Hmm.
And that goes back to what I said about my argument, in my opinion, that we have all been dehumanized. And in order to remove that, we must rehumanize ourselves. And that's part of how you can love yourself, is writing your own story. But again, that's the challenging part. It's about sitting with your discomfort and understanding that we all at times can have a loveless consciousness because of the society that we live in.
Why is it so hard for individual human beings to want to have a deeper understanding of themselves by doing their work? And when you used that phrase earlier, it struck me because that's really what it's about.
Mm.
The willingness to do our own work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole era that I went through with training and training others. We used to call it doing your rug work. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not willing to, you have to break down sometime to build up, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not willing to break down and be honest, and let whatever emotions, whatever past, whatever feelings you have out, to be able to have that breakthrough to move on, then most of the time it doesn't work because you're not being true to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Those around you who know you're not being truthful. So the ability and the willingness to really be honest with self, because we all got stuff. I mean, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
anybody that don't have stuff.
Right.
uh,
You're right.
and willing to admit that stuff and break down and get past that. Because if you don't, you end up being this insular person that is just for you, when the goal of life is to be for others. And that's why it's so difficult for some people to even think about the other, because they're so wrapped up into themselves and an I and me reality, they can't even think about we and us. There isn't a sliver of light of we and us that is allowed to come in.
And where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from history, from
Mm-hmm.
fear, from experiences. And here's my phrase: our daily lived experiential realities are all different. Our daily lived experiential realities, not better than, not less than, not more than, just different. But
Mm-hmm.
those differences are sometimes monumental. If you've never gone, if you've never experienced racism and prejudice and discrimination that goes with it, but if you've never been fearful of your life because of racism, you don't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell the stories of being chased home by the Klan from school across the railroad tracks. Because once you got
Mm-hmm.
across the railroad tracks, they stopped because they were outnumbered if they came across there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if you've never had that experience, then you don't. I talk about, well, okay. But no, these people, if they would have caught you, would have killed you. This,
Right.
this was serious stuff. So those daily lived experiential realities, and here's the thing we all know about those experiences. If you don't process those experiences, the learning doesn't happen in having experience. The learning comes in the processing of the experience.
Yes.
And so many people don't want to take the time to process the experience because they're fearful if they do that, well, what's going to be on the other side? What's going to be, and then what am I called to be or do or become because of now processing?
Exactly. You're right. 1,000% right. Because it's that insecurity that we have because it's rehumanization is a process. But it's like, again, it goes back to the whole majority of us are privileged in a sense in Western society, but you have to accept the fact that what the opportunities and resources that you're given, other people are exploited for. So again,
Right.
in a capitalist society, it's about me,
Yep.
right? So it's about I did this, so I deserve this, right? When it's really about earning and receiving. And what you said to me resonated with my paper that I just submitted. It's about altruism.
Yeah.
So altruism is about it's about intent, it's about volunteering, it's about not expecting an external reward for, like I said, being a humanist, right?
Right. Right.
And the idea is to, like, if everyone had altruistic motives, we could be, or pure altruistic motives, because again, in society, we kind of breed this individualism aspect. And that goes back to my principles before about my Pan-African principles about humanism, collectivism, and utilitarianism. So when we talk about humanism, again, it's about people before profit. And it means society's welfare should be prioritized over individual ownership.
Right.
But that's the challenge, right? It's about, and that collectivism is we before me, which demonstrates working together triumphs over working separately. But again, so when we talked to this about before about Houston in particular, I talk a lot about EDI. There's activism happening everywhere, but the challenge is that I know someone told me to just get a podcast. I'm like, but there's so many podcasts. Like, is there a way we can kind of come together? You know what I mean? There's so many different people doing the same thing, and then it kind of gets lost because it's so spread out. If that makes sense, and if there was a way we could bring it together, that would be helpful. But again, it's about, to revert back to what you said about, again, I always talk about sitting with our discomfort, and it's very hard because it's a process. Rehumanization is a process.
Yeah.
And again, it's about when we love ourselves, we can then love other people. But again, we have to accept, like what you said about, we have to accept our past. We have to understand our past to do something about the present, to have a restored future.
Right. But that's why charity and justice in this country is so messed up. We've made it very easy for people through charity to feel good about doing something and doing something sometimes very little. Because charity gets you that good feeling, that warm fuzzy, that deep in your heart kind of thing. But in the long run, it doesn't do anything. Charity was always meant to be a short-term thing, not a permanent, ongoing, everyday thing. Justice, we love to do the downstream stuff. So charity is the downstream. We after the fact, we react after the fact. We raise money for the issue and the cause that we see. What we won't do is the upstream stuff, which is justice, to find out what's causing us to have to do all these things downstream. Because that means you have to then look at injustice, you have to look at policy changes, you have to look at equity, you have to look at all those things that you don't want to really face. It's easier just to write the check for charity for somebody else to do it in my name. I therefore take no personal responsibility, and I get the good feeling from doing it. So we're locked into this charitable understanding of society without any willingness to focus on the justice part. And so we're going to continue to do that. And then if you add the church piece to it, well, then I call that holy guilt. So, so then you get the holy guilt money, and they feel good, even though within all of their doctrines, within all of their teachings is social justice. All right. But they rather focus on the charity part than the justice part. And so we're kind of locked into all these things because we don't want to, as you said, we don't want to push people beyond their comfort zone. Nobody wants to be upset beyond their comfort zone. And nobody wants to be guilty of the person pushing them beyond their comfort zone. So we're stuck. We're literally stuck.
Right. How do we get over that stuckness? Because like you said, what critical race theory talks about social justice. To give your listeners an idea, social justice means it's where reliable distribution of resources and opportunities benefit everybody, not just a specific group of people. So yeah, that's the...
And that only comes through policy change.
Exactly. And again, who is the one creating these policies? Because one's culture creates one's institution. That is from Molefi Asante. He talks about, one's culture creates one's institution. And we have to understand that there's specific type of groups creating this culture that just keeps trickling down from generation to generation, right?
Yeah.
How do we remove that? How do we, again, that's why I said about building strong children. It starts with our children.
Yeah.
And hopes. But I mean, you said your background, what has changed for you? What has changed as far as, because I feel like history tends to repeat itself.
The change process for me is a deep thing. The koinonia, the change of heart. If you can't change the heart, you're not going to do anything, because the mind will do what it's going to do, and all information, facts, and data that you get, yada yada. That's not the issue. How do you take all that stuff, process it into what feelings and emotions does all this thinking and all this data and research cause me to feel? What does it emote inside of me? And based upon what I say, it emotes inside of me from feelings and emotions. What am I called to do? The next step is, what am I called to do? So the head, the heart, the gut, the think, the feel, the act, the fancy way, the cognitive, affective, behavioral parts of my being.
Okay.
Once I internalize and process all of this, it always ends up in the gut. When you get this restless feeling, when you get this, you can't sleep, when you get up in the middle of the night and you take notes with a little notepad by your bed because you're so frustrated or so excited about doing something, and because you know change has to happen, that's when it begins to work. As long as it's here, as long as in the cognitive domain, nothing's going to happen. You know, it's a feeling and emotional thing. And that's the important piece of this work. If I can get you to really feel and ask questions based on your feelings and emotion, Larry, why is it this way? What is this about? How come this? Why? Then we can begin to talk about what you can do as a human being, because it's back to your rehumanization. It's back to becoming what a fully developed human being, the essence of human beingness. The essence of human beingness is a very special thing. And that's where your great change leaders come, because they understand that the action has to take place from such a deep, profound level in your being. You don't worry about being killed. You don't worry about, you say what you got to say, you do what you got to do, you march and you demonstrate, and you're not fearful of your life. You're not fearful of anything, because you know you're doing the right thing.
Right. And I guess that it goes back to trust.
Yeah.
And how can I'm currently doing research for the university about, so I'm doing an analysis. We did like, we won this bid that was like 2.4 million for the Northeastern universities. And it's about widening access for research degrees for, say, Black and minority ethnic students.
Right.
And a lot of what they're saying in the analysis, what I'm writing up, is a lot of it is about belonging and trust. They don't trust the institution. Right. So, and it shows because we interviewed undergraduates, the current postgraduate researchers, and staff of color. And what's happening is researchers in particular, they've increased representation for them, but they still don't trust, they brought them in, the researchers now, but they've done nothing for them to feel included in this space. They've done nothing in order for them to, I guess, develop the research skills. And the researchers the Black researchers don't really know the end goal to what they're doing. So, right, it's about, then again, it goes back to what you said about, it's a facade. I call it a facade reparation.
Right.
That's kind of what diversity inclusion kind of is, right? It's kind of like a facade reparation, where it's like, okay, we're compensating you with this, but it's a facade because once you're here, either you play by our rules or you're going to stay in your same position. You won't progress. And
believe it or not, we're out of time.
Oh, okay, so
already again.
Yeah, love thyself, love, and it's easier to love everyone else. And it's about finding that process. Yes.
There you go. I was going to ask you for a closing comment, but you just gave it. So
okay.
Thank you. So good to have you on, Christoper, Dr. Brown. We'll make sure that we continue this dialogue in the future. A few closing thoughts. What this really boils down to is, how do we want to be the light that shines out of the darkness? The darkness helps you begin to understand and recognize the light, but you have to finish the work. In your lifetime, that's not the way it works. You have to continue to do your work. You add to the deposit, hopefully helping others to make sense as to why they should come out of the darkness. It is a battle of forgiving and remembering and moving forward. And it questions in the totality, again, what type of human beings going forward do we want to be? Do we want to be stuck in the paradigm that we're in now? Or do we want to create a holistic new paradigm that is inclusive, holistic, that is humanizing, that is all those things that we may have aspirations toward, but somehow just can't seem to make it? It is those things that we talk about a lot in one-on-ones and small groups in person. And we always say, look, we got to do something. We got to do something. Well, we're trying to do something. There are some groups now in Houston, particularly one that we love to talk about because we're all involved in it, Houston 2036, that is focused on equity, and begin to kind of have those richer dialogues, deeper dialogues around what does it mean. So we're going to ask you to join us as we go forward. We'll let you know what some of the events are, because in the end of the day, it's all about transparency, accountability, and trust. And the way we get to those things are to be aware of the 5 things that we need to make sure happens. We have to understand power. We have to understand people. We have to understand policies. And we have to understand personalities. And to understand also that politics is not a dirty word. That the change we're looking for is through a lot of it, the political process, because that's where the policy change takes place. And to become a true advocate, an educated true advocate with a compassionate heart, is really what we need as we go forward. So that's kind of where we're headed for the fall and into the beginning of 2024. And so we look forward to you joining us here on Dialogue Houston. It's always great to hear from you as we go forward. And I really appreciate everybody. And we're going to take this journey together. We're going to learn as much as we can from our guests that will help us process where we want to go. And it will be something, I think, that helps us all get there in one way or another. So until then, as always, please, as I always say, be well, stay safe, and peace, power, and love.